That's right.
All right, so the next submission is by Mr. Haycock.
Up, we have Euan Haycock joining us for 5 minutes.
Morning.
Morning. Good to have you here. Hand that over to you now.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, I believe that the Gene Technology Bill currently before the Select Committee is far too loose in its scope and parameters and is unnecessary. Also, the entire control over whether or not a field trial of a new gene technology can occur would be in the hands of a single unelected regulator body. A rogue regulator could destroy agricultural and horticultural sectors irreparably in very short order. I'll note here that NBIE has said that some new crops will be able to bypass the regulator if they consider that the risk is low, and NBIE was the people behind forming the bill. And I assume this means that current GE crops, of which there are only 3 commercially worldwide from 20 years of research, would be able to be grown in New Zealand in short order after this bill is passed, if it is passed, which I hope it's not. Further, our current legislation controlling gene-related research and development is actually perfectly adequate and does not prevent new gene technology from reaching the field trial stage, as some people suggest. Has good risk assessment component that has worked well, and as of yet, no new gene technology has emerged from New Zealand, either into our domestic market field trials. And this is because financial returns from these new products could not be realised in the real world against traditional equivalents. Climate change seems to be a major driver behind introducing the new gene technology bill. And I'd like to point out here that there's actually a natural alternative which is being grown in New Zealand currently that can reduce the methane output of our stock animals by 90%. It's a red seaweed being grown in Bluff, and it has an active ingredient bromoform, which is currently listed as a veterinary medicine, which means that we can't actually use the processed red seaweed here in New Zealand. In Australia, they can. I'd like to see that the status of bromoform, or at least the red seaweed, changed in status to being a food supplement for stock as opposed to being restricted under veterinary medicine, because this would open up huge market export, it would reduce our stock methane output by 90%, which actually means we can meet our carbon targets naturally while retaining our pure green status and our GE-free status in New Zealand with regard to food and animals. There's also quite a number of things that really concern me around gene technology and what gets done with it worldwide. In the 1990s, there was a bacteria modified to turn the waste material from wheat harvest into alcohol, and that alcohol being used in farm machinery, and then the nutrient-rich leftover sludge being put back onto the soil to act as a fertilizer for future crops. They went right through a whole regulatory process and was fully approved to enter into field trials. A postgraduate student did some further work, and simulated the soil with the sludge added to it and planted wheat in it, came back and found that the wheat had completely turned to slime. The bacteria was still active in the soil. They've also been tested to see how far bacteria spreads from an isolated 10 square metre trial. They put a marker on it so that they could trace it. It went worldwide from between 10 square metre sample in one country. So that bacteria could have gone worldwide. Wheat as a grass could have affected all of the grasses worldwide and led to or possibly terrestrial extinction of our fauna. Really major stuff. Currently, there is a cyanobacteria that they found that lives around volcanoes in hot water, single-celled thing, feeds on the nutrients, sequesters carbon dioxide, and then sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Only exists in the hot waters around the volcanoes. They're looking at modifying that bacteria so that they can thrive in colder waters. It will be in direct competition with plankton, which is basically the food source primary food source for the entire ocean. It could lead to a mass extinction, or at least severe depletion in our oceans. These are the kind of things that lead me to believe that gene technology around the world actually needs to be tightened up and more risk assessments placed upon it rather than loosened up here. That's kind of in a nutshell. I think a lot of other people will cover a lot of other things. I don't know if you have any questions.
We got time. We've got time.
I've got a moment here. If you have a question, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, are you concerned that even in the US regulatory framework, there's restrictions on use of gene tech for microbes and animals, it's only allowed for plants. But here in this proposed liberalisation, quite a radical liberalisation,
yes,
you would be able to have exemptions for any number of different kinds of species. So you bring into play the risks of microbial.
Yes, there are those risks, and I think the regulator can amend the legislation. Doesn't have to go back through a process like this at any time in the future. I will note that I actually approve of the use of new gene technology in medical interventions, but I think that can be done through amendments or clauses added into existing legislation, as long as those new gene technologies applied for disease treatment and gene treatment are not able to be carried on generation to generation, so that to treat specific gene disorders or illnesses within specific people.
Thank you.
Non-heritable.
Yeah, I mean, he brings up a good question. What happened to the hype around red seaweed? Why are we going down the GMO track? And, I find the argument from the national government that the idea of, okay, we need GMOs to reduce the methane, to be really silly when this is the same government that's advocating for, increasing the amount of fossil fuels that we use as a society and extracting fossil fuels. which is also a big contributor of methane?
I quite agree with you.
Yeah.
You go, Elvira.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we mentioned, well, I spoke about that last time also, about healthy soils rich in organic matter and microbes have methanotrophic bacteria, which basically take care of the methane so that it's not a problem. And that's always been the way in wild ecosystems that have had ruminants, zebras, giraffes, bison, you know, buffalo, whatever, huge herds. And there's never been a problem because the soil bacteria have taken care of it. So they blame the animals when, if they just farm in a way that's biologically healthy, they don't need to blame the animals. You know, just leave these poor animals to do what they
The biological health gets in the way of profits.
Exactly. And the example he was talking about, that was incredibly scary. That GE that was going to turn waste into alcohol, and they were going to release it, the GE bacterium, sorry. And unfortunately, the postgrad just happened to do that experiment at the right time. I mean, it's like any bacterium that gets into a soil, once it's out there, it's incredibly difficult to contain it, you know, unless you're a separate island. Unfortunately, we have two islands, so one island might be able to, you know, contain it. But, and also what hasn't really come up, and Jack is an expert on this, is the concept of horizontal gene transfer, because microbes in the soil, or microbes generally, microbes in your gut, they don't have to be the same species to mate. They can just pass genetic information between themselves, no matter how distantly related they are. So it doesn't have to be inherited. It's just like, oh, let's just swap a bit of DNA here and there. And that happens in soils, it happens in your gut. So there's two things to worry about. If you get anything that's GE microbial stuff in the soil, it could destroy your soil bacteria. It could outcompete them. It could take too much oxygen out of the soil, and so you get anaerobic soils. It could do anything like that, really, really conceivably. Also, in your gut, you eat genetically edited or genetically modified food, and that engineered DNA is in your gut.
I did have a question about that. I thought the gut destroyed DNA, though. Broke it down.
Not necessarily, no. It can further down in the digestive system, but it's not like 100%. See, nothing in a biological system is 100%. You know, you always get exceptions. That's why you always get resistance popping up, and why you always get things that you don't expect genetically. Yeah, it was a really good submission, I thought, and he had it really in a nutshell, and obviously knew what he was talking about. There were no moments where you thought, oh, he's not quite up to date. He's really up to date with everything, and well done him.
Claire.
Oh, well, Elvira's really said it all, but what we do have in New Zealand is some really excellent grass, clovers that we have developed conventionally. And it's almost that GE is trying to find a space. So a bit like the margarine thing, they had to tell you how terrible butter was to be able to promote margarine. So they've actually, the worst thing with this bill is they are ignoring the alternatives. Now, in the HASNO Act that exists today, that is the one thing that if you are to do something GE, you have to consider whether there are alternatives that can do it as well or better. Now, Mr. Haycock, he actually talked about field trials. This also refers back to the earlier submission we heard about the animals. The animal field trials that are going on at Ag Research are such a dismal failure, but it's not just that they failed their outcomes. The inhumanity and inhumane suffering of abortions, deformities, immune system problems, and they all almost have to be euthanized on veterinary advice. They keep them alive until the vet says you can't do it anymore. And so if we do start to engineer even our microbes if they start to affect our animals in this way, and they get into the gut, because we know that the ryegrass has something called an endophyte, which is a microbe. They're talking about engineering the AR37 endophyte. Now, this, yet again, if that escapes and cohabitates or horizontally transfers with a whole lot of other microorganisms, you've actually got animal health, human health, soil health, and plant health totally and utterly destroyed. So this guy, Mr. Haycock, brought up some really, really excellent points, and I really hope that this committee really considers this. And what has come to my notice is that they are struggling to find anybody who can oppose the bill scientifically. Almost everybody who we've seen can actually back up their concerns. I don't call it anti, I call it concerned and raising really good debatable problems. We aren't anti, we're just saying you ain't got the science yet.
That's a really good point. That's what I have noticed from a lot of these submitters. I thought going into this, it's like, okay, these are a bunch of people who are just skeptical of the scientific method and don't care. But all the submissions we've been getting is like, oh, okay, yep, they've got actually good backing behind them.
Yeah. But it's not just that. If you have a look at earlier submitters, and I think Soraya mentioned William Rolleston, he's been making suggestions which are blatantly untrue. It actually can be proved with science that what he's saying is the hope that it might happen.
Was he the one on?
But when it does happen,
was he the individual that was on Q&A not so long ago? Yeah,
probably.
I remember hearing a very silly analogy comparing the spread of GMO with, or the lack of adoption of GMO with automobiles. I'm like, why are we comparing those two? It's not, you're not comparing apples to apples here. Cars and GMOs are completely two different things.
But the interesting thing is a car now, before it can be released, it has to go through so many safety tests. And you get in the car now, and it's so safe that you're almost frightened that if the electronics runs out, you'll never be able to get out of it.
Unless it's a Tesla.
Yeah, well, yeah. But just going back, I mean, there is not one human study on the long-term effects of GMOs. We are guinea pigs, and this is fake food being put onto our plates. And actually, as I say, they are looking for a desperate, you mentioned climate change, they're looking for this desperate hook with which they can claim. And I guarantee you, every time the government says, okay, we'll put research into climate change, all the GE thought channeled into the climate change parameters. Yeah, but if they changed it to animal health, they'd all get changed into the animal health spectrum.
Because it's about making a buck at the end of the day.
Yeah, they're looking for, they're looking for government money to pay for their commercial research. Yeah. That's what it is.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook.